How do you guys define morality anyways?
That's a good question. I think we try to just not define it because it can be too difficult. But I think basically it's questions of right or wrong, good or bad. What do and it's not just because these aren't objective problems. There's not necessarily an objective right or wrong. We study what people think is right or wrong and what people think is good or bad and what behaviors make people want to punish other people or want them to suffer some kind of punitive harm to the person who caused the harm.
So, how is it possible to study all those things if there isn't a set place of what is good and what is bad that you're coming from?
You just have to talk about averages and attitudes and what people's perceptions are. So we can't make any claims of objective right and wrong. What we can say is all humans are not all. That would almost never be the case. Most humans think, for example, murder is wrong in most contexts. Some would say it's okay in certain contexts, but for the most part, most people think murdering is bad. So that would be a sort of like average moral judgment, even if you can't say objectively, it's like an objective fact about the universe.
So,
I don't know, is murder wrong on your planet?
well, it's interesting. Oh yeah, big time. So,
Oh, yeah?
Oh yeah.
you guys know that murder is wrong, but you don't know why it's wrong?
Um, we can know parts of why it's wrong. We know that people have evolved to judge people who pose threats to the social group and who pose threats to the self and one's kin. So if a person is a person who regularly causes harm to other people, that person poses a threat to you, to your family, and to your social group. And so, unless they had a really good reason for it, like somebody was going to kill them, then we would think that person's somebody we have to look out for, that's someone we can't trust. And so, we've evolved to basically judge those people, to hate those people, and sometimes to want those people to suffer, to be locked up, or in some cases, even be put to death themselves.
But not
Wow.
in all cases, right? It seems
Not in all
like
cases.
it's possible to justify that.
Yes, yes.
So,
And
it's
different
some
people would justify it different ways.
hmm.
How do you justify it?
How do I justify murder?
Yeah, exactly.
I haven't had to yet, thankfully. So let's hope
Don't do a lot of
I
murdering?
keep that. No, haven't done any murdering in my day.
You kind of
So,
look like
and
the
I'm
type.
hoping to like make it through life without doing that. So,
Good plan.
yeah.
So, it seems like what you guys are calling morality sounds a lot like ethics on our planet, which is a sort of attention to the ecology around you, sort of taking care of your community and things like that.
Mhm.
Because we have
Um,
a pretty simple definition of morality, and that has to do with violations of consent.
okay.
Yeah, it's like
So,
if you
so if
violate
somebody
my
wanted
consent,
to be murdered, then it would be okay.
There'd be a lot of paperwork involved, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I see. Okay.
yeah, it's bad to violate someone's consent. That's it.
Okay.
Keeps it
What
clean.
if two people's consent comes into conflict? Then what?
Can you give an
Okay,
example?
Let's say one person, well, I guess this wouldn't be an issue of would it be an issue of consent? Let's go with it. Let's say one person, their whole life's happiness is listening to their music really, really, really loudly in their house. They like it on full blast all through the night. And their neighbor wants quiet. How do you resolve that conflict? Is one person wrong and one person right when it's a conflict of interest?
Soundproofing?
mm, soundproofing.
Soundproofing.
A
Yeah, so
perfect
law.
Who
vacuum?
has to pay for the soundproofing? The person who wants their music loud or the person who wants it quiet?
Ah, that's a good question.
So this is what our courts just spend a lot of time figuring out.
Yeah.
There's
Who
always
does
these
the
fine lines that need
soundproofing?
negotiated, particularly when there's conflicts of interest.
Mhm.
But that's what the legal system seems to be for, right? Is the ability to negotiate who pays when there's some moral issue that's not necessarily raised to the level of criminal issue, right? Isn't that what small claims court is?
I think so. Yeah. I think it's a when they're nonviolent sort of disagreements about who had what obligation to do what, and then who owes who money or whom. Yeah. It
And
sounds like you guys have a really good system in place. I'm impressed.
well, we wouldn't get to outer space without it, you know?
That's true. That's true.
So,
Why did you decide to study this?
Yeah, so I really got into morality by way of studying belief in free will. So and it was sort of random how I stumbled into it. I was taking a stats class, and I was using a free will data set, and I was finding that people's beliefs in free will were correlated with their desires to punish people, which just means that people who believe more in the concept of human free will also want to punish people more on average. Um,
whoa.
and so, yeah, and so I was also working with someone who looks at motivated reasoning. So I kind of looked at the reverse process. Like, is it not only the case that people who believe in free will, who think people are sort of more responsible for their behavior in their life, do they want to punish people more? But is it possible that when people want to punish people more, they actually increase their belief in free will? Their belief in free will partially is motivated by desire to hold people morally responsible. Because whenever a person administers punishment toward another person, now they have caused harm and they could be subject to judgment themselves. So let's say I think my neighbor is a bad person and I want them to suffer, so I go slash his tires on his car to get back at him. Well, people then might judge me, but if I can say, no, he's a horrible person and he deserved it, then they might not punish me. So people have to justify the punitive harm that they bring on other people. And one way they can do that is by saying, this person's a bad person. This person freely chose to do this bad thing, and therefore they deserve the suffering that we're now going to bring upon that person who caused harm in the first place. Does that make sense?
Wow. That's very vengeful.
It is vengeful. It is vengeful, but I think it's sort of a natural human impulse that evolved for good reason. So I don't know if creatures on your planet are the same, but here people are shaped by punishment, and not only just punishment, but also social judgment. So when other people dislike a human, that human wants to change their behavior because they don't like to be disliked. So we've evolved to want to punish people and to blame people and morally judge people, because that's an effective way to shape other people's behavior so they become better citizens in the future.
But what if,
Enforced ethics.
but what if you're
Mhm.
pushing them towards something that doesn't actually make them a better citizen?
Like what?
Well, like, let's say you live in a place where lynchings are common, and the thing that everybody pushes everybody else towards is some terrible, terrible thing that they do to Black people.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do then?
Yeah, it's not a perfect a lot of it would be shaped by the norms of the time. So at different points throughout history, different things would be considered acceptable, and then that would be what is considered in the best interests of people at the time. So people tend to punish um on we have like certainly evolved certain like moral preferences, like an aversion to harm is probably the biggest one. But certain harms can be justified depending on the culture, depending on, who is in power. um, so it's not that clean, right? It can vary. So yeah, it is possible that there would be a norm in place where the behavior people are reinforcing, even though it's consistent with what they think is acceptable and tolerable and good, it's not what, let's say, modern people would say, and what people today would say is morally good, which is why it's so hard to answer the question, because perceptions of like moral goodness change over time.
Do they though? Because there were people back in the day of lynchings that were going around and saying that that was a bad idea and that it was immoral, right?
Yeah, it's more, I guess it would be more, how wrong is it perceived to be on average by what percentage of people, and to the extent that they're willing to accept costs to enforce those norms, or avoid benefits to do so. So, yeah, like I would I mean, there might be cases when there were behaviors that people, I mean, like same-sex marriage would be a good one in the United States, and other places around the world. It used to be this perceived as morally wrong to engage in same-sex sexual relationships. And now, for the most part, people think it's fine. It's not even really a moral issue anymore. People have a hard time seeing it as a moral issue, but it used to be perceived as a moral issue. Now, that's not to say all people thought it was wrong or that all people thought it was really wrong. It's just to say that on average, moral preferences can shift over time.